so that we can save this for other future pilots. Looks like we've got 188 people on board with us tonight. That's great.
And some people are having trouble getting in.
Okay.
I'm just responding to some text things here to see if that helps them get in.
Okay.
And it's saying, lots of people are saying there's an error. So let's see if that's the correct.
Maybe, what is the, I think the passcode is FAAST, right? FA,
I thought it was volunteer,
volunteer. That's right. I'm thinking of another one. Okay. Were there any capitals in that?
just the first letter.
So the first letter, then volunteer is the passcode. So,
So I've sent it out in text to a bunch of people. So we can go ahead and get going.
okay. Next slide. The next slide.
Yep. We'll try to get that going here. Here we go. So we've done an interaction. Alexi was one of the ones having a hard time getting in, and Brian apparently has a flying assignment, so will not be joining us. So when we did have some questions from the last webinar that came up in a number of emails, and it was to clarify what kind of airplanes can be used for volunteering. And the answer is almost anything. It varies significantly across the type of flying. And for most things that are requiring medical transportation or something related to medical, you need to have a certified airplane. But the certificate you have can vary. It can be private pilot or instrument. So just in a quick example, I've flown many different kinds of airplanes for discovery and medical missions. And just an example of the collection of planes that I've used. So, and I do have friends. There's one woman in Cape Cod that does a lot of conservation flights that does them in her Cub. So again, don't feel like if you're in an LSA or an experimental plane, or you have something like a Cub that you can't help out. There's always an opportunity. And then we also have needs for greeters and people on the ground to help as well. So we also have the Wings program. I don't know if you want to talk about it, Rob, or do you want me to go ahead? So
yeah, go ahead, Mark, please. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean the Wings program. If you guys are getting the promotion materials, you're probably already familiar with it, so we don't want to dwell on it. But it's proven statistically that if you do engage in the program, you do become a safer pilot, and you get to skip BFRs. So I've done basic, and I'm working on both advanced and master. I find I like any excuse to train, and I encourage everybody else to have that attitude. There's a couple of things here where you can go get more information. And there's something called a Wings Pro that are available locally all around the country. And you can go and find people on the FAASafety.gov website and look under resources in the FAAST team directory to find someone in your area if you have specific questions. So success today, again, just make sure we're all grounded in the fact that there's a huge need, and we're only scratching the surface of meeting that need right now. Important safety considerations, and this is not an instructional webinar. This is a share experiences webinar. I'm not an instructor. I've just got a commercial certificate, and I look at this more like hangar flying. So we encourage all of you to send us mission scenarios so that we can share those with other people and develop best practices among ourselves. There are other resources, obviously the FAAST Team Wings resources, but there's EA, IMC clubs and VMC clubs, and there's a variety of AOPA safety courses available. So every month now, we'll pick one of the volunteer pilot organizations and do a quick video on a testimonial of sorts.
Without Angel Flight, my mother wouldn't have her lungs.
It's allowed Miles to be home and heal and be a part of his normal life.
All these people volunteering their own time, it's amazing.
Great Great organization, Angel Flight West, and this QR code takes you to their website.
Angel Flight.
So last month we reviewed some interesting numbers that 6 million cancer treatment appointments are missed every year because of transportation. 32 million Americans live remotely. 1 million animals are euthanized a year. And of the 27,000 high schools out there, only 500 have some kind of STEM program for aviation. So every month I'll add a new number. And this is, there's only 33 comprehensive cancer treatment centers in the US. And as you might guess, they're around major urban areas. So if you have a rare type of cancer, or if your particular diagnosis is severe, your only option may be to get to one of these cancer centers. And typically you're not one and done. Typically it's many visits in order to try to get you on the path to mending. So again, we can play a big part of solving for this challenge. And as we did last month, there's any number of ways to fly, from flying to contribute, flying blood, flying cargo, doing disaster relief, animals, turtles, bone marrow, blood. I mean, again, there's many, many ways to contribute. The volunteer organizations, what we didn't do is the quick poll. So maybe we can go off and do the quick poll of who's on the phone or who's on the webinar tonight. Rob, can you bring that up?
Sure, we'll do.
And the reason we're going to do the poll is it just helps us both know who's out there and who are volunteers already. And that way I can go faster or slower in certain sections. So are you an active volunteer? It's the first one. Rob, are you seeing responses?
I am. We're at 175 of 183 of 225 answered.
That's good. So why don't we go ahead and publish the results?
So I'm going to end the poll, end it, and share the results with everybody.
So pretty close to last time in terms of volunteer pilot participation, about half, and then also pretty close to last time, about a little under 20% are enrolled in Wings, which again, good opportunity for people to join the Wings program. Great. All right. Thanks, Rob. So for those of you who are not volunteer pilots, again, here's just an example of the number of things that you can consider for volunteering, even if it's only just once every other year or even less. So many organizations, you can find a list of all of these organizations, or the majority of them, on the Air Care Alliance website. Or if you ever have any specific questions about how to volunteer, just email Rob or I, and we can help point you in the right direction. But many, many good organizations in the US, well over 80. So let's continue. Here we go. So another thing we'll try to do is provide a mission example every month, just to give you an idea of what the missions will look like. Not too many people have seen a conservation mission, and they can be doing audits of animals, but they can also be doing audits of things on the ground. Here's a recent example from Lighthawk, for example. It's 2 passengers flying around a specific route, 1 to 2 hours to do an audit of the forest canopy. In order to fly for these organizations, you need 750 or 1,000 hours, which is a lot compared to some of the medical organizations. And one organization requires only a private license, and the other one requires instrument. In this case, both require certified aircraft. That's not always the case. There's some smaller conservation organizations that do not require certified aircraft. So the safety considerations we reviewed last week, again, we could spend many, many hours on each one of these segments. This week, we're going to try to, and every month going forward, we're going to try to pick one quadrant to focus on. And this will be distraction, startle, the ones in red. And we can dive in. For those who have not seen how this works, you need to find, someone has to have a need. the volunteer pilot organization qualifies and vets it, and they are supposed to do a general passenger briefing. That varies by organization. And the onus is really on the pilot to make sure that we've evaluated whether the mission is a good mission match for us, and to do as much of the passenger briefing and needs check in advance, so you're not doing it at the airport just before you go flying. AOPA has some safety courses. Again, there's checklists that are available. The QR codes here will take you to the areas, to the courses, or to get a checklist. Many instructors, but my instructors in particular, really encouraged me to develop my own checklists, and make sure that things that I might be missing on a regular basis, I put in big bold letters in yellow and get myself in the routine of checking for those. The other part of pre-flight is, and I want to make sure that we're emphasizing this again, as much as we can do before we take off, we should. And we have one pilot example here who made a video of how to do something as simple as getting onto his wing, putting his seatbelt on, taking it off, using the air vents and things like that. So we're encouraging volunteer pilot organizations to create those videos as well. And again, try to make it so that day of flight and at the airport, we're not going through all these basics. So if there's no questions, we'll dive into the first scenario. And this is, there's two scenarios here. One's kind of interesting, and what are we prepared for? A crying baby. It doesn't stop crying and the weather is getting really worse than forecast. And do we divert and continue after the weather passes? And the other scenario is an interesting one. First-time flyer, brain cancer, toddler, mother traveling with a newborn infant. And just before getting to the destination, starts blood-curdling screaming that was very, very loud and was unsettled. So much so that air traffic control could hear it and unsolicited offered help clearing direct to the airport and any approach and any runway. And both of those are pretty unusual. And number two, scenario two is extremely unusual. That's only happened to me once in all of my flying. So for the first scenario, and this is a reminder that in the discussion section, there's going to be three highlights. One is, what do we do well? What do I or someone else can do better? And any context that we think might help understand the scenario. So in this case, the first case, the crying baby, obviously not an emergency, or at least not to me. And that's where we all need to assess what we can handle during flights. And it wasn't too much of a distraction. However, the weather was getting much worse. So ended up diverting, waiting, and the timing worked out where the passenger was actually going to an appointment that was the next day. So there was a lot of flexibility in getting them to the destination. So really need to avoid get there itis, especially when you have distractions and might feel the pressure from someone like a crying child. In scenario two, it's kind of an interesting situation. One of the discussions we had at the volunteer pilot organization level was, when you have a passenger with a pretty severe illness, what are the forces of flight going to do to them in terms of being unsettled? It's hard to deal with that in an intake process, so it's not going to ever be perfect. But when you do see, a child with a severe illness, at the volunteer pilot organization, try to understand whether it's going to travel well. What are the issues? And bring that up with the parents as well. In this case, if I, as I've gotten, this is many years ago now, as I've gotten into flying more and more missions, I take co-pilots more and more often. And that gives us two of us to manage an anomaly that may come up. And in this case, having a co-pilot along would have been a big help. The other other piece here is, what's your normal process approaching an airport? Uh, do you get excited? Do you get easily distracted, or do you stay focused and use your checklists and think ahead and well ahead about what you're going to do? What I did here, we'll go skip to the next one, is I said, oh, great, I can do a direct approach, even though you guys are advertising an ILS to 3-4, even though it's an VFR day, MS or VFR day. And I won't have to spend an extra 5 or so minutes going around and doing this approach. Runway 11, I was coming from the west, runway 11 in this case is I'd never used before at White Plains, and downsloping runway. And I took it and I used all of the runway because I was rushed instead of having a plan. So, ever since then, whenever ATC offers help, I always step back and say, is it going to be outside of my normal flow? Is it going to become a distraction? And if it is in any way at all, I'm not going to take them up on an offer. We're flying the plane and we need to think about, where we can break the accident chain before it even gets started. So this is an example of where, when I do chair fly most of my flights, this is an example where I definitely in chair flying said, what was I thinking? I should have just gone with my normal flow, landed on the runway I'm familiar with, and everything would have been fine. And in this particular case, little guy, literally as soon as the wheels hit the ground, stopped. It was just an amazing transition. So, so again, scenarios very, very, very rare, but it's all part of us thinking through how to think about what can happen to us and how we can go about dealing with it before we take the flight as much as possible. So like last month, I'll give an opportunity for you guys to ask any questions about these two scenarios, and then we'll continue on. So do you see anything in the Q&A, Rob?
Yes, I do. It says, anonymous attendee, crying child descent is a sign of air pressure and pain buildup with change in air pressure. Parent or adult with child should be forewarned to provide something to suck on during the landing sequence.
Yep, and those are good things. Both of these scenarios were in cruise, so it wasn't that wasn't the cause. But that's actually a great point, because a lot of people that are, I have not especially flown with kids recently, forget those 2 points. So part of my briefing for anyone with children is to make sure we have something that can help with at least some of the symptoms of changing air pressure. So if we're set, 1, 2, 3, I will go on to the next one. So this one reviewed, I'm repeating it from last month. This guy is Travis Mills. He's a quad amputee. I'd flown him before. And the whole issue around mobility and ability to get out of the airplane in an emergency. Travis drives a truck. He walks without assistance. Very energetic and impressive guy. So you look at him and forget that he can't open a door. Can't open the aircraft door. Can't reach an oxygen mask. Can't undo his seatbelt. So so the top photo is where I flew him the first time, and his father was with him, and he wanted to be in the co-pilot seat. We got him in the co-pilot seat, but we had to take 3 limbs off to do that. So is that a good idea? Probably not. In the moment, it seemed like a great idea. So once I chair flew it, I said, I don't think I'm going to let that happen again. But what happened 2 years later was this other flight where I thought there was going to be 2 people traveling, him and someone, and it was just him alone. So again, got wrapped up in the bias of saying, oh yeah, we can do this, and probably should have second thought, thought about that again. So really the whole idea of co-pilot seat eligibility is, I think, a common issue for most of us to go through, or should be a common issue that we should be challenging ourselves to say, who should be in the co-pilot seat, as well as if they're in the back seat, are they, well off enough or competent enough to get out of the plane in an emergency using their own power. So won't focus on this necessarily, but again, another good example of what we should be thinking through pre-flight as much as possible and as much upstream as possible during discussions with the passengers before they go to the airport.
Hey, Mark, question for you. What qualifications are for a co-pilot to go along with you?
None.
Good. Thank you.
In most cases, they have to sign a liability waiver as if they were a regular passenger. And that can vary. I mean, it's up to the PIC to determine what their personal issues. I take anybody, and because I also do discovery flights, so I'm sort of used to the drill of having someone in the right seat that has no flying experience. But there's also scenarios where you fill up the plane with the passenger and companions, and that person is not going to have any familiarity with flying the airplane.
One other thing that Paul mentioned is, which would address a couple of slides ago, I always have earplugs available for the little ones.
Yes. So I think I had on that slide no ear protection. Ear protection is a really good thing to have, and definitely on my pre-flight discussion list. Little ones should have ear protection, immediate, from whatever age, especially in a Cirrus or anything like that. It can get very, very noisy. In the jet, it can also get noisy enough, and we have available to the passengers noise canceling headsets if they want to put them on. It's something that's rarely used, but again, sound protection, noise protection, as many things as we can do to make it more comfortable for the people we're flying, we want to do, obviously, and that's a good thing. So great for bringing that up. Thanks. So this particular scenario was kind of interesting, because again, this happened maybe 4 years ago, and this Travis Mills guy that I mentioned a little bit before has a therapeutic camp in Maine, and we take people to and from that camp from all over the country, and until this particular flight, I thought nothing of it, because the people we were flying, and sometimes we fly them with their families, just seemed to be, well-adjusted, members of the community. And in this particular case, had an unusual amount of turbulence going into the first airport of a 2-airport drop, and clearly was triggering something, and landed, and the person that this was happening to exited very quickly, and still had another flight to go because he was the second stop. So in this particular case, we reviewed it with the volunteer pilot organization to say, hey, we really need to start coming up with a way to rank the severity of what someone's going through with PTSD or anything else, so that pilots aren't surprised by some of these reactions that can occur during a flight. And some of that's occurred. There's still, the intake process and review process is not perfect, and it's hard for a pilot to be responsible for figuring out what degree of PTSD or other affliction they may have. But it's worth having a discussion, and we can only get better. So we did come up with a way to do better on intake. And what I did do well, and I think most pilots would do well, is not rush anything after that kind of event, because there's really no need to be anywhere in general aviation in a day, and all of our passengers are supposed to be ambulatory and stable. So as long as you're not in a mode where you're trying to, really force a timeline, it's great to slow down. And that worked well enough for this situation where we just slowed down, took some time, made sure that he was not sitting up front, and just went to the next airport without any incident, at all. But you also do have to self-assess, when you're taking, anybody in your plane that you've not met before, and make sure that you're thinking through the scenarios that you can handle. And this is not, again, I don't want to be just sharing the most challenging examples. And in this case, it wasn't that challenging and it went fairly smoothly, but it can impact your performance. So do we have any questions on this one, or?
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions, Mark. One, Tom asks or states that he lives in the British Virgin Islands and most of his flights are international. Do you support these flights?
Some of the organizations do international, yes. I've been to BVI, for example. So, but you would need to email me, and I would need to point you to specific ones. They're not all listed on the Air Care Alliance website.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking. There's a need.
And then JJ asks, how do you decide when to take a co-pilot?
Good question. For me, I take a co-pilot whenever I can, wherever weight and balance allows. And that just gives me, and most of those co-pilots I take are, an existing, either someone considering becoming a volunteer or is already a volunteer. And that just gives me another, set of eyes and ears and hands to help with ramp control and, every other aspect of flying. The other part of it, which we didn't get into yet in any of these slides, is crew resource management and getting out of your normal flows. I'm not sure how many of you have experienced that, but if you give someone the opportunity to do radios and they're not necessarily as proficient as you think they need to be for what you're doing, it's now become a distraction. And how do you tactfully take that back? Or some, depending on who I'm flying, I may let someone turn the knob to change the altitude number once or twice, but if I'm sensing they're not comfortable in the seat, I'll start, I'll limit what they can do to help. It may just be doing luggage help. And we may get to one of the scenarios where that is the case. But yeah, if you do have the room, take a co-pilot every time you can. It just helps.
Okay, couple more.
Sure.
Anonymous attendee says, I've seen flight attendants give warm cups to parents to put over the ears of children unable to equalize pressure. Good suggestion.
That's one I've never seen, but I'm sure if we use one of the new AI tools, I'm sure we'll get a long list of ways to prevent ear discomfort. I've used babies with bottles or nukes, we call them, or kids using the yawning or chewing gum or whatever we can do to get that resolved is what we've tried over the years. Or just being disciplined not to do 1,500 feet per minute descents in a Cirrus. It's just, we had, and I'm going to go off on something that we talked about briefly last month. Someone was talking about being kept too high by ATC and then having to do a very rapid descent. So what I shared is I put a VNAV point on top of the airport, and I do math either depending on the plane I'm flying, and I'll say, hey, I want to be at 1,500 feet at that airport. And if I'm in a Cirrus, I'll say 500 feet per minute descent. And if they haven't started me down on that profile in time to hit that number, I start asking for a descent proactively. You don't always get it, depending on what airspace you're in, but at least you're on top of trying to manage the comfort of your passengers around what is, a reasonable rate of descent for them to tolerate.
And one more question. Brent asked, I once had a deaf passenger. I wasn't told by the voluntary organization, or VOP. Fortunately, I have written safety cards for my Piper Arrow.
That's very good. I know of examples of where that's happened as well. And it's something that they should be catching on intake. The other is blind passengers, but I'll get to that one in a second. But good points. If it can happen, it's going to happen. And one of the reasons we're running these events is to try to let you know that you're not the only one it's happened to. And if you have a question about something, this is the forum that you'll be able to get support from, because most of us have seen a lot of the scenarios already. So this is a different one, and when we get to the next one, I believe is the one we can talk about deaf and blind and other challenges. So this is an example again of co-pilot issue, baggage issue, and when just to say no. And this was to the same therapeutic camp, and it was a very low IFR thing over all of the Northeast US. It was a day of doing 2 missions and get to the airport, and the veterans, who are very nice people, look at the plane and say, do we have to fly in that? And their bags, which I didn't catch right away, were taking up this couch, and they were huge. Plus they had pillows, snowboards, and a ton of gift bags that they'd gotten during their visit. And one passenger was going to have to be a co-pilot. So the question was, go with partial bags. And, it got pretty obvious right away that this was not going to be a fun flight with them. And I just made the decision not to take them and said, we need to come up with another plan, because it's not going to work, be good, and it's going to be an hour and a half of agony for them and me being distracted. So we found out that the first leg had been flown on a PC-12, and that pilot had not mentioned the amount of luggage they had, and nor had they been reminded that when they were at the facility that they shouldn't be bringing back a ton of luggage as well. So so that, again, saying no is tough. I know we all have the desire to do a mission and keep people happy and be fulfilled by doing this, but it is important to know when just to say no. Any questions on that one? Nope. So let's jump. I'm going to jump one, and this will tie into the question about someone that was deaf. So on a day of doing discovery flights, there was a need, because there was a pilot shortage that day, to do multiple flights. The first passenger, age 9, thought was going to be fine in the co-pilot seat, grabbed the controls with both hands and wouldn't let go of the stick, and just kept trying to move it. Luckily was of a size that was not hard to overpower, but it was something that had never happened before for me as a pilot doing discovery flights and trying to maintain control. So it was a sort of a wake-up call, and this was around the same time that there was a crash that you guys may have heard about in Santa Monica on a discovery flight with someone in a LSA, where the passenger grabbed the stick on short final and pulled straight up. The plane stalled, and they both perished. So co-pilot eligibility is very, very important, obviously, for us to be looking at. In the second example, we had a youngster just start feeling ill, getting shaky, very nervous, and I decided to abort, and the parent was not happy, berating the child, saying not to abort, to go. And it's again important as PIC not to get into that, get their itis, must do the mission. nothing's that important to get, someone uncomfortable. And it was very unusual to see a parent in a back seat getting out of control. Almost got to the point where we were debating whether to allow parents to go on the missions just because of that potential. The third was a late arrival team with on the intake form not having any medical information. Seemed a little nervous, but not too bad, and froze shortly after takeoff. Wouldn't talk, wouldn't move, and just went back. So that was a concern that the intake process had been skipped or something had been skipped on it, and it had not. And as PIC wouldn't know enough to say, hey, did you miss anything? And let's make sure we got everything reviewed. So we do know that we are getting better at co-pilot seat eligibility, but it's all something as PIC that we should be, having front and center as much as we can on any flight, whether it's a medical flight, a conservation flight, or a discovery flight. So getting into the example of having a deaf passenger, I've had deaf passenger, quadriplegic, and a blind passenger. And the little girl here is an example picture of someone who really wanted to fly, quadriplegic, weak hand grip, and was about less than 80 pounds in a wheelchair. And we decided, and this is many years ago, we decided to get her into the airplane. And this was in a Columbia 350. So we dropped her, two of us dropped her into the co-pilot seat. And then they asked if I would take, as she was in foster care, asked if I would take a cognitively challenged 14-year-old boy without a guardian at the same time. I initially said no, and they said he was very well behaved and would stay in his seatbelt. So I got caught up in the moment and said yes. So got back, no incidents, static person flying, child in the back, had to isolate so it wouldn't become a distracting because he just would not stop talking and asking questions. And got us to the point to say, really, should we be doing this? And we've then made a determination that we shouldn't be doing those kind of discovery flights because there's no way as PIC to be able to predictably get somebody out of the airplane in an emergency with those kind of issues. It's rather interesting. I did have someone who is blind that I haven't written up as a scenario, but could be a scenario all by themselves, that met in a rural area and on a Sunday. And they and it was their first time flying in a plane and first time going to Boston for treatment in this particular case. And I had gotten into a habit of asking, and it was one of these rush last minute flights. So I was doing my normal questions in person instead of over the phone. And the question was, oh, you're going to Boston. Where are you staying? The answer was at the airport. And the next question was, where at the airport? At the airport. So that was the end of that first question. The next one was, how are you getting to your appointment? They're getting me. Who's getting you? They're getting me. The next question, how much money do you have on you? $20. So the companion was of no use. They didn't have any of the answers to those questions either. So the VPO was closed for the weekend, and unlucky for us, their emergency phone number person wasn't answering the phone. So pressed with, what do we do for this person on a Sunday morning, trying to get to an appointment for Monday? So for me, it was one of those things where I was able to help by just calling ahead to get signature to say, hey, can you get this person to the hotel? And make sure that they get handed off to a hotel manager, and then calling a hotel, getting a room, talking to the manager specifically to say, hey, can you get this person fed? And that I may need you to arrange to drive them to their appointment at Mass Eye and Ear. So all that came together before we departed from their upstate Maine location. And it worked out. But that was, one of those, go above the beyond things where everything just happened to line up. But those things extremely rare. I mean, something that extreme has not happened to me since. But it's what you need as a pilot, just to be prepared to deal with any type of contingency that may come across, and also decide whether you want to be flying someone that is blind, that can probably not get themselves out of the airplane by on their own. So definitely a little bit easier to deal with, but blind or quadriplegic, definitely a challenge. So any questions for this one?
I'm looking, trying to answer them as I can.
So
just general contents, comments. Go ahead, Mark, with the next one.
Continue. Okay, cool. So I'm going to go back to this one. Again, this month we're really focusing on co-pilot assessment. Who is a good co-pilot? Here we had two scenarios, and the value of pre-flight call. Very important to get it, make sure that you're getting that discipline in. And you've already heard a few examples of what can happen when you don't have enough time to do a good pre-flight call and assess how that person's going to be flying with you. The first person, nice gentleman, first time in a plane, first time in a small plane, very focused on food, extremely focused on food, and going for a cancer evaluation. Second one, teen with a double amputation from Haiti, but did not mention during the pre-airport meetup that the teen wanted to be a co-pilot and really had aspirations of flying. So made sure with the sister that she thought the younger one could actually get out of the airplane, and she agreed. So and her mobility, she could get up on the wing. It was clear that she was motivated and capable. So at this point, I had not developed a good discipline of doing the co-pilot seat evaluation. These are many years ago, into the pre-flight call. Much better at doing it now, but it's just, again, something that we all need to do better at doing before they get to the airport. So we've thought through what's going to be the best approach to dealing with it. And this gentleman, but ended up being very happy being isolated, not hearing anything going on for the whole flight, and only tapped me on the shoulder a couple of times during the flight to ask a question, but his questions were mostly about eating. So again, very important to get define your comfort zone and coming up with how to do these pre-flight discussions. Any questions on this one?
Just Alexi asked the question, or actually it's more of a statement. Some organizations require that mission assistants or co-pilots need to be registered with the organization prior to the flight. Is that something that you're aware of, Mark?
It is, and that it varies by organization. So if you're taking your daughter or your significant other along with you, they're not obviously registered with the organization. And some of the organizations just require them to sign a passenger liability waiver as if they were just a regular passenger. So if you have interest in bringing someone who's not, signed up with the organization, or it's your first time doing it, just contact your volunteer pilot organization, see what their policy is on that, and generally it will get accommodated. May not, if it's 1 day's notice, it may not happen smoothly, But I'm constantly bringing people that are, day of the flight, joining the flight.
Sort of dovetails with it. Do you have your own liability release, or are they
Yeah.
organization specific?
It's organization specific.
Thank you.
I have run into one person ever that had anybody flying with him ever sign a liability waiver before he would let them on his plane. But that extreme, again, I've only seen once in 15 years.
And then the question was, how about using compassion flight call sign?
So that's we touched on that briefly last time.
Yes.
So the compassion flight call sign is specific to organizations. You can get a compassion flight call sign with Lifeline pilots, for example, and you can use that only in the passenger carrying leg for that specific organization. Some of the Angel flights have their own call signs. Veterans Airlift Command has Hero Flight call signs. So you just need to understand what the rules are for your particular organization. With ADSB and everything in place now, unless you can program your transponder to match the call sign that you're going to be using, you can't use it. The transponder needs to match what's in your flight plan. And again, if you're flying with a compassion flight call sign or an Angel flight or Hero flight call sign, you need to be able to program that into your transponder for the passenger carrying leg. So if there's more on that on the Air Carolines website as well, and also happy to answer any questions that you may have if you want to email me after the fact. But that is basically the rule. It's organization specific. So if you're working at one of these organizations and the person is using call sign Compassion Flight 123 and their transponder isn't matching, once a month they send a list of the variations to the organization, or the discrepancies to the organization, and the organization is responsible for contacting the pilot to say, hey, you've got to either make sure you're putting it into the transponder or stop using it. My airplane does not have a changeable transponder, so all I do is put it in the comments of a flight plan. But again, it's up to you to decide how you want to approach it, but you do need to follow those rules.
Another good question from Edward. Are new volunteer pilots required to fly with experienced volunteer pilots when they first join an organization?
And the usual answer is no. So as long as you met all the qualifications for that particular organization, a lot of the organizations now are assigning mentors. Those are people that have done many flights, but that varies as well across organizations. I did my first one, probably my first 50 I did without flying with anybody that had ever flown one before. All set? Going to the next one.
Yep. Thanks.
Cool. So again, this is another co-pilot example here. This is, I'm not sure if you all have been through this or not, but scenario one, familiar co-pilot helping on a position on a mission, did a walk around, everything looked okay, took off. And another scenario, took off in the light jet, got an altitude disagree. And you'll get altitude disagrees in planes that have more than one ARs. And in a light jet, you can have 2 or 3. So if in an altitude disagree, there's a specific procedure to follow, and you can continue flight. You just need to know, what you're supposed to do and follow the checklist. And the other scenario, the Piper error, there were no anomalies in flight. So when scenario one, the lesson learned was don't rush the checks, because there was a tiny piece of tape. In this particular case, instead of, if you look at the bottom left picture, their static ports, the screw-in thing had broken, so they'd used painter's tape on top of it, which was a common practice in this particular class of plane. and one tiny piece of tape smaller than your fingernail was left on one part of the static port, and that was causing. And the co-pilot had done the walk around, removed all the covers on the plane. So the pilot during the walk around pre-flight did it fairly quickly and missed seeing this tiny, tiny piece of tape on part of the static port. And removing that made the error go away. And then the other scenario, which was kind of interesting when I learned of it, and this what didn't happen to me, is that the pilot was putting away their plane after the flight home and opened up the oil cover, access cover, and noticed that the oil stick had not been screwed back in. So the co-pilot that was along for the mission, out of habit with their plane, had gone to the oil stick and taken it off to let it vent, but instead of leaving the oil stick access cover open, had closed it. So they were lucky they lost no oil, and those things that you need to know to not rely on your co-pilot to do critical pieces of your pre-flight, and to add in extra things that you think a well-intentioned co-pilot might do to you if you were to rush your pre-flight scenario. So having a familiar co-pilot along can disrupt your flows and hopefully not result in something that's catastrophic, but can still be kind of an awakening experience. Any questions on this one?
Just a comment from Andy. Another consideration might be a benefit of having an experienced co-pilot to address work overload in an unusual situation.
And that's why I take co-pilots all the time. It's especially if I do have access to ones that are more senior. When I first started flying, I would grab a mentor all the time, and in my case, I had some that didn't, were free mentors. In other cases, I had to pay someone to come with me, but it was definitely worth it. And I also found now I'm older now as well, but having pilots around that were in their 60s that had seen just about everything, I almost always learned something on some flight that I would never have had access to from a knowledge point of view. So grabbing mentors, grabbing people to go on flights, definitely a good thing, especially people that have a lot of experience. And it doesn't have to be volunteer experience. And all of this hopefully just applies to general aviation, everything that we're going over here.
Another comment is, by co-pilot, do you mean, are you referring to anyone sitting in the right seat, regardless of status of this flight, training, or interested in flying?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. And in our small planes, we may have a choice. We may have to have our passengers in the co-pilot seat just to fit everybody in the airplane. One thing I didn't go over here, and in some of the other examples with children, is early on we had some pilots having a child in a car seat in the back seat, and then the parent in the co-pilot seat, and that could make for a very unhappy child going through an experience that was extremely alien to them, but the parent thinking that they were just driving a car and it was normal to have the child in the back seat. So we, over the years, have learned to try to emphasize that if there's a parent and child traveling together, to try to put them both beside each other, to make sure that the child has as much support as possible. So if we don't have any questions, we'll squeeze in one more because we're just about at the hour. And this is an interesting one. Let me see, maybe we won't do this one. That's an interesting one.
Or do you have any ones with animals? Somebody did that.
I did, but I went over that one last week. I didn't add any more this week.
All right. Thank you.
I think I did one last week.
You did the one on turtles.
Did I do one with 2 dogs last week?
I don't remember the dogs, but I do remember the turtle.
Maybe I did turtles. Okay. Anyways, we've done animals, and I'll definitely do them next month.
Mhm.
And we'll just do this one really quick because this is an interesting one. And it may, well, we're gonna run out of time. We won't do it. So I'll do this one real quick. Had this child right here had flown a lot and was always unruly whenever I was flying her. And I thought I knew everything about car seats by this point. And if you see this little metal buckle on the bottom, it was feeding behind her back between the plastic part of the car seat and the fabric. And that buckle was stabbing her in the back on every flight. So she was unruly on every single flight. And we couldn't figure out why. Her caregiver couldn't figure out why. And the child was nonverbal and many other issues going on. And it was only when I noticed on one flight there was a bump that whoops, this is causing discomfort, that I realized we would have to put the seatbelt on top of the car seat in order to hold it in place. The other issue was then reminding the parent to get the child out of the car seat when the seatbelt's going over the top. It's not going to be a simple matter of just disconnecting the usual front, the little red button, and releasing that part of the harness. You're going to need to release the seatbelt likely in order to get the child out of the car seat safely. So we've definitely gotten a lot better at looking at the different types of car seats and different connections and trying to make it as easy as possible to get the car seats in. No matter what, we do end up spending some extra time at times trying to figure out how to get these to be connected. So I think we're running out of time. So if anyone has any other questions, we can take
One
those.
question from Mark. He says he saw this webinar and just explained volunteer arena. I have not visited with pilots who are volunteers. Are there other resources or materials you would recommend I explore before making a decision to become a volunteer pilot?
You go to the AOPA. Here we'll skip back down here. So thank you for doing this. AOPA has a number of courses at their Safety Institute. This is one place you can go to look. This QR code will get you there. And then on the Air Care Alliance website as well. And then a lot of the IMC clubs, the EA IMC clubs, have volunteer pilot members as well. I mean, ours, the one I run in Norwood, Mass, more than half of the members of that IMC club, which has no fees, by the way, anyone can join, are volunteer pilots.
Excellent.
So
We're at 8 o'clock. Hey, just to let everybody know, I'll be issuing or will be issuing a Wings credit here within a couple of days for your attendance here tonight. This does apply for Wings program. Let's keep ourselves proficient by participating in the Wings program.
Right, and thank you everyone for attending. Volunteering is addictive, and we want to see your scenarios as well that you'd like to share. We're looking forward to continuing these every month.